And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new podcast from your favorite basketball host on the Rock M Radio channel. I am your host Sam Snelling. If you're watching us on YouTube, to your right is everybody's favorite co-host Matthew J. Harris. Matt, how are you tonight?
I'm well. It's approximately 64 degrees in our basement, so I'm wearing a jacket while we have heat advisories outside. So I'm cold in a very, very hot climate, but otherwise, I'm fine. And
That's a good basement temp.
It is. 100-year-old homes didn't mess around with building solid foundations and keeping things cold because you had to store things down here back in the day that were perishable. So it's been pretty good otherwise, but eager to be back and happy to talk about basketball, even if we are kind of in the doldrums right now of the off season. So
that is for sure. Yeah, you're in the basement. I'm on the second floor. I'm actually like wearing shorts because it's warm up here. Old homes, as good as they were at keeping the cooler temperatures at the bottom, not so good for things up top. And yeah, so during the summer, things get a little warm up here. But we are going to talk about basketball because that's what we're here for. As we kind of discussed, so you weren't here for the previous podcast. We talked with Mr. Watkins. And basically, my approach for this off season is if we don't really have anything to discuss, then we'll just talk about the roster.
Okay.
And
we haven't talked about these guys at all. Haven't talked about them at all.
Exactly. But specifically, like last time we did spend a lot of time on ball handlers and basically looking at the ball handling position. Who's going to factor into that? I think everybody kind of knew that. Going in that, Tony Perkins, as long as he's healthy, is going to play as many minutes as he can there. And so who else is going to kind of factor into that discussion? I think we figured it out. Today, we're going to shift that focus a little bit more. And this is going to be a fairly broad discussion because Missouri's roster has a whole lot of wangs, lots of wangs.
Yep.
I've got Caleb Grill, Tamar Bates, Jacob Cruz, Marquez Warwick, Aiden Shaw, Mark Mitchell, Trent Pierce, Honor Batang, Marcus Allen. And yeah, so that's 9. We'll call it there. I'm gonna keep Barrett in the yeah. Yeah, some of those guys are different types of wings, but I mean, this basically this idea of somebody who can, play anywhere 2 to 4, and there's a lot of them, and so it is going to be an interesting thing to try to track minutes because there's a lot of guys with experience. You're looking at Caleb Grill and the guy who, if you read my piece on experience on the main site a few weeks back, you might notice that Marquez Warwick is the guy who's played the most minutes in the SEC coming into the season.
Yeah.
Certainly a guy that you would expect to play. Jacob Cruz is an experienced guy in his senior year. Tamar Bates had a breakout season a year ago. He certainly expects to play a lot. And that's not even getting into Mark Mitchell, who's probably a little bit more of a natural wing. Aiden Shaw, who, I think we fudge a little bit with him. I mean, he's not really going to take a lot of outside shots, but then Trent Pierce is a guy that they project really as a wing. And then certainly Batang and Allen are guys that are looking to kind of crack into the rotation. So with that sort of precursor, I figure we could at least start with the 2 to 3 spot. So kind of look at it, guys who aren't really going to factor in as that kind of like potential 4. and this is a fairly crowded group. If the season were to start today, Matt, who do you think is starting out of all these guys? Who's going to start at the 2 spot?
I think it sort of depends on, what you value at the 2 spot. I think last year they tried to put as much ball handling on the floor as they could at once. So you had really 2 guys that I thought were combo guards playing in those positions. Now I think you've got a guy that they're clearly going to slot at the 1. And realistically, do you want that 2 to be a guy who you feel like can do some creating, some initiating, a guy who can, for stretches, kind of run the offense for you? I think if that's what you want, if that's something you want to have alongside of Tony Perkins, then I think I would sort of start with Marquez Warwick at that spot. It's something that he's sort of done at NKU. He can play on the ball. He can shift off the ball and play on second side actions. If the ball swings to him, he can run some stuff there. He can get them into secondary offense. He's a guy you're comfortable with at least shooting off the catch. So if you want 2 ball handlers, I think you could start with Warwick there. He's also a guy who's, like you mentioned earlier, he's logged a lot of time.
I think 4,200 minutes is what.
Yeah, he's been north of 80.
He's
been at least like 78 or 80% of minutes every year he's been in college. So if you feel like it's early and you want some reliable hands, if you want another ball handler on the floor, I think you could start with Marquez Warwick in that spot and just sort of see how that goes. Tamar Bates was a guy who was billed as a combo coming out of high school. But the on-ball creation piece has never really sort of come there. I think he's a guy who can play off the bounce and get to the mid-range. I think the comparison to a Kareem Rush has always been, not hyperbolic, but I think they share some similar traits, but we viewed Kareem as kind of a wing. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're looking for a guy who's purely a secondary ball handler who can sort of backstop Perkins, who has a lot of minutes and who can still, give you some shooting on the floor, Warwick would sort of be where I would start at that 2 spot. Now, again, that's going to depend on how they want to, make certain facets of their offense run. But I think Warwick, to me, profiles more as a typical kind of like 2-guard combo guard. And you could sort of start from there, to get another ball handler on the floor. That's where my head goes right away. But I don't know if I'm being too narrow-minded and, to start this off.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, he factored into, at least a portion of our discussion on the ball handling side. And I mean, my stance. Anybody who listens to us regularly knows my stance on ball handling. Like, I like having multiple ball handlers on the floor. Guys that you trust to bring the ball up against pressure. I think that if you can run an efficient offense that limits turnovers, you're probably going to be doing that with guys who are secure with the ball. And Warwick is certainly a guy who can kind of fit that description at the 2. I agree with your assessment on Tamar Bates. I think Tamar had a sort of a breakout year last year. It's one thing to kind of remember, though, that Missouri was also a pretty bad team. And there weren't really a whole lot of options. Fortunately for Tamar, like he was able to sort of keep his his efficiency even with those increased usage rates. But he's not really a guy that I want to throw the ball and let him, bring the ball to the floor, against pressure a whole lot.
Yeah.
So and then the only other guy that I think you might even kind of consider is maybe Caleb Grill.
He's always been sort of an off-ball guy everywhere he's been. Sort of a spacer, sort of a guy who has tried to shoot coming off movement a little bit. The efficiency's been sort of scattershot there. I think of Grill more as an off-ball kind of spacer guy, and who can, function for you, holding a corner, holding the opposite slot. He's showed at times when he was able to play that he can make some cuts. It's not a skill set that we've ever seen from him, and I think you want that additional ball handler out there. Missouri is, run sets and run offense where it wants to have 2 of those guys on the floor. I think it's just going to be really, really hard to sort of justify Gruel and Cruz there. Now, if they believe they want to get as much athleticism on the floor and as much length and sort of defensive pressure and disruption on the floor, I think that shifts the conversation because Marquez's work is listed at 6'2". I still think that's kind of generous, at least when I watched him on tape. I always feel like we add 2 inches to every guy. So he's maybe 6'1" probably in reality. We watched 2 guards that got picked off a lot in ball screens, that got targeted a lot for switches. Warwick, coach in Northern Kentucky, said he was a terrible defender basically for 3 years. Mm-hmm. If you feel like you want to get a little bit more positional size at that spot, then I think you slide Tamar Bates into the 2 hole and you basically say, okay, we're going to have a 6'4" point guard. We trust Tony to come up and get us into our offense. And we want to have another kind of bigger, more rangy kind of body at that 2 spot and, play Tamar there. So I think that it really sort of becomes an offense-defense situation. Do you think you've got enough ball handling in order to slide up a guy to get a little bit bigger at that 2? Particularly because I think you're in the SEC, you're going to be facing bigger, longer kind of wings and, guards. So I think that's where the rub really comes in for me is I think Warwick and, I think Marquez and Tamar can give you different things offensively. Both can kind of hunt a little bit off the bounce, off 1 and 2 dribbles for pull-ups, but defensively. And I think in terms of positional size, that might push Tamar into that kind of combo 2 spot. So that's the other consideration I really keep in mind there as well.
Well, yeah, and then if you're looking at sort of like who's filling in at the 2, then the natural question is what's going to be your guy at the 3, and like it's really like there's a lot of crowding going on, and I mean if you're starting, so like that, and that's another thing is like even if you're starting, obviously like we're pretty much putting Perkins in with a pen at the 1. I think there's a possibility maybe that Ant Robinson gets some consideration. It's like if he's able to kind of crack and possibly starting at the 2, or then you have kind of like 2 ball handlers, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But the only other thing, like I think about like if you're starting with Marquez and that is like a smaller 2 guard, even though you have good size at the 1.
Yeah.
And then if you're looking at Tamar, like Tamar's got good size for a 2 guard, but not necessarily like a traditional wing. He's got average, slightly below average size.
Yeah.
His wingspan solid enough that he could defend, but he's never really been the strongest defender.
No, and the way I sort of think about it too is you mentioned Ant. You could bump. Ant's 6'3", has measured I think +5, +6, so he's a little light in terms of his weight in terms of mass, but has exceptional length, really good quickness. You have 2 guys then, and Ant and Tony, who are exceptional at creating disruption, triggering transition opportunities. The drawback with Ant is, are you going to get enough shooting and offense out of him to sort of help buoy things? I think that's sort of the consideration there is, Ant's the guy that, if anybody's read our forums and, has even like heard me or see me on Twitter, I said this, to me, he's the most fascinating guy on this roster because his rates of disruption are outlierish for any freshman, even if you account for minutes, if you account for, playing in a power conference. Ant was exceptionally disruption prone last year, and that in a good way. That'll, ebb off a little bit, but guys like him still, when they trend down, they still have 3-4% steal rates. That's insanely high for a combo guard. And you put that next to Tony Perkins, who also has good steal rates. How they generate turnovers is also very complementary. Their styles balance well. But then the question becomes, do you trust Ant to shoot off the catch? I think he was like 4 of 28 shooting off the catch from 3 last year. Like that's you can't have that. And now Ant came here as billed more as kind of a better guy with a rhythm dribble or off a 1 dribble pull up. But man, at this level, you got to be able to hit spot shots. And
yeah.
So I think that if we were to work through it at the 2 guard, and this is probably edging kind of back into the territory you and Watkins covered, I think with Robinson, the case would be positional size in terms of frame, really good on-ball defender, complements what Tony does defensively. Marquez Warwick, crazy amount of experience, can shoot the ball well off the catch at a elite level, and can make some plays off 1-2 dribbles, but kind of a sieve at times defensively. Tamar, probably the most balanced offensive game, positional size for a high major kind of 2 or 3 guy. But as you said, the defensive end has got to get more consistent from him. So it's really, what do you value putting that alongside Tony? To me, I would I think, default early on to Warwick, because I think you want to have 2 guys that have shown they can handle. You want to have 2 guys that can shoot the ball off the catch. And I think you can cover for Warwick in other ways defensively. And you can still get Tamar on the floor as a 3 and still feel okay. That's kind of where I think you would start. The question would be, do you eventually bump Tamar up the positional slot to the 2? That's sort of how I've got it working in my brain here on June 19. But that's how I've sort of tried to make it work. Again, maybe that's getting too in the weeds even for where we are at this point in the offseason, but that's sort of how it's been working in my brain, accounting for having watched these guys on tape, and at least not to the degree that Matt Watkins has, but at least looking at their statistical profiles. That's sort of how I've got it kind of working at the 2 spot. And T.O.'s there if you want to throw some garbage time minutes at him.
Yeah. And kind of looking at the 3 spot then, I do think that that's where you're going to get into the discussion with Caleb Grill. It's where it seems like they're projecting Jacob Cruz. It's going to be interesting because at some point you are going to need to push some shooting onto the floor.
Right.
I think Cruz has maybe shown that he's going to be a little bit more of a consistent shooter. If Grill's on a heater, you're going to have to keep him on the floor. If Trent Pierce, if his shooting comes around, that's a guy that I think could be really dangerous. And now you're also kind of getting into the realm where, what's going to happen with Anar Batang, who I certainly think they're going to have to find some minutes to make sure that, that their most talented freshman is engaged all year, and not leaning too hard into your experience. So, I mean, right now, so if you're starting Warwick at the 2, we've already got Perkins at the 1, then who's on the wing for you at the 3 spot?
I'm probably going Tamar there, just because I think there is more dribble creation, bigger size. Tamar's rim finishing against length, I think, was, kind of spotty at times down the stretch, but I think he was also dog tired near the end, so I don't blame him. But
also a 40% shooter from distance.
So you get the same jump shooting that you would get with Grill and Cruz. You get a little bit more athleticism than you get with both of those guys. You get a guy that I think can, what I liked in the kind of early in the SEC season was we saw him starting to do a little bit more out of ball screens, a little bit more out of different actions that Missouri was trying to run, that were outside their normal playbook. And he was getting to spots. He was hunting. He was playing with some patience and at his own kind of speed and controlling tempo really effectively. I think his legs went down the stretch. So that, again, sort of hurt it. But I think he's probably your most well-rounded offensive player in that spot. I think the thing you're going to have to do to make that work is you're going to have to emphasize that there's going to have to be consistency on the ball, in terms of, being on time in rotations, not biting on shot fakes, the things that, I think we sort of saw from him at IU kind of crept up again at times last year. I think our hope was that maybe he would grow into kind of a guy who you could see generating turnovers, but, we're going on 3 years now and the steal rate is still pretty modest. I think his personal foul efficiency, which is, how many turnovers he generates in proportions to his fouls, is still pretty middle of the road. So I think the question then becomes, can you get Tamar to buy into being a really good off-ball positional defender, let Tony sort of apply the ball pressure, let Warwick, get some cover from help, and have some nice balance up and down the rotation in terms of offensive looks there. So that's where I would start, would probably be with Bates, just because I think you get the most versatile sort of skill set in that setup. After that, I think, to me, I would probably go to Cruz in the backup spot. I think that, it's hard because you've only got one season. It's in the OVC. How's that going to scale up? But the kid was lights out shooting off the catch last year. His dribble jumpers are taking one dribble to his right or to his left to relocate, to let a guy fly by him and then shoot a three.
Mm-hmm.
Can do some things as an off-ball cutter. He has been able to exploit mismatches on smaller guards in the post. You're not going to expect him to be an elite level athlete, but he's going to do enough offensively, to convert high value shots that come his way. I think, when I've watched him defensively, I think he was playing in a scheme that didn't ask him to create a lot of turnovers, but, when he's been able to, be in the right place and have other people sort of create opportunities to get turnovers, he's able to, cash those in and, create them and get a team in transition pretty efficiently. I think his shooting, as Watkins outlined in a post a couple weeks ago, is more efficient or more consistent than Caleb Grills is at this point, and you're getting a little bit of a bigger frame. So those would sort of be where I would start, would be Bates and Cruz on the wing. But we know they like Caleb Grill. They wouldn't have brought him back if they didn't like him. They didn't think they could have a role for him. And he's a guy that, if you look at Watkins' projections, he's projected to have the fourth most minutes on the team this year. So maybe I'm overrating, what Cruz can do and, their, affinity for, Caleb, but that's sort of where I see it would be Tamar and Jacob to start it out.
Well, I do think, the Grill situation is interesting because he does at least defend and rebound,
yep.
which is two areas where they very clearly have struggled the last couple of years. When Caleb Grill was in the game, he improved their rebounding last year.
Yep.
And for a team that, has basically gotten crushed, even against fairly mid competition, having good rebounders on the floor, isn't something that I think you can necessarily overlook. Now, does somebody like Cruz, because of, Cruz has, better size for the position,
and he rebounds at the level that you would expect for a bigger wing. He's not he's probably around the median. So you're not trading out rebounding to play Cruz. I think that to me is the linchpin.
Is he what's he listed at? 6'8"?
6'7", 6'8".
But we think he's probably 6'7".
Probably.
I mean, he looks smaller than Mark when Mark was dunking on him in the little highlight video we got to see. No offense to Jacob,
that happens.
Mark Mitchell's probably going to dunk on a lot of people.
It's practice. You come there to get dunked on and get better.
If you're not getting dunked on, or you're not trying to block shots. So I do think that's going to be for me one of the things that I'm interested in is how many minutes are they going to find for Grill, because Grill is streaky, and when he's not shooting the ball well, he's not really giving you much offensively.
Right.
On the other end of the floor, he is a guy that is useful, but if you can have sort of decent defense from a guy like Cruz, and you can have a consistent, 40% 3-point shooter, then I think it's easier to kind of find him, those minutes. And I think this is probably a solid sort of natural pivot as we look at this sort of positional where you're switching from the 3 to the 4. And we still haven't talked about freshmen, and Marcus Allen, who I think is probably going to at least factor into some of the discussions at the 4 spot. Mark Mitchell very clearly is probably the leader to play most minutes at the 4, but also could play small ball 5. And again, bringing up Trent Pierce, a guy that stuck around and has great size, has shown good defensive instincts, rebounds the ball well for, not being the strongest guy. he didn't hit shots, but it certainly looks good coming off his fingers.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's easy to keep Pierce in the 4. Realistically, at the 4, what happens is you didn't get Mark and Tony out of the portal to like have them get in dogfights for minutes. Those are going to be your tent pole guys here. So I think you feel good about slotting Mark for 26, 28 minutes tonight. The real question is going to be, if Trent makes shots at a high enough level. When I watched him in high school and even last year, he graded out pretty well defensively. Can be exploited a little bit in isolation situations and switches, but in the time we saw him, again, small sample size, was pretty solid as a defender. Rebound rates were solid. He's got a pretty good stock percentage for his size, which is steals plus blocks. Created turnovers efficiently. And, when I watched him in high school, he was used as a 4-man that could stretch. You sub out a guy who's maybe a more athletic kind of hybrid forward, and you put him out there as a spacer. If he is knocking down shots and, giving you some positional size defensively, I think he becomes a guy that, you slot in behind Mark. Or if you want to go to jumbo lineups, if you want to slide, we talked about scaling down. There's ways this lineup could scale up. You could scale Mitchell to the 3. You could run, Pierce to the 4, and you could slide, Aiden Shaw down to the 5, and play small or big. Or you could just put, Gray or Marshall out there. I'm imagining a lineup, with Mark Mitchell at the 3, Trent Pierce at the 4, and then, Josh Gray or Peyton Marshall at the 5. That's a big lineup. It's still getting some, creation that they hopefully would get out of Mark, kind of playing in the Kobe role. You still get some spacing from Trent, and you still get a guy who can kind of anchor your back line. So to me, really, the debate here at the 4 is going to be between Shaw and Pierce. I think, who can sort of jostle their way into backstopping Mark, and how does that affect lineups? It's a big summer for Aiden at this point. It's got to be go time. There was some runway for him last year to kind of walk into some more stable minutes. And as we talked about a lot last year, just did not really engage at times offensively. He does a lot of things on the defensive end and on the glass, but you cannot have that big of a void on offense. So the question is going to be just, to me, does Pierce's shooting come along enough to the point where no matter what Aiden gives you, you just can't have that kind of hole on offense. So that's really where I think we are at this point, is Shaw and Pierce sort of in that, battling for that second slot at the 4. But correct me if you think I'm off base in thinking that.
No, like I agree with your assessment completely on Aiden, specifically because, for a guy who I think we were kind of hoping he would take a step forward, he was useless on offense outside of lobs and, some 45 cuts here and there.
Yeah.
That was basically his offensive game. If he was not in position to do one of those two things, he was barely looking at the rim. And
2 catch and shoot jumpers. 2 catch and shoot jumpers. That's all he attempted.
Oh, did you just send how did you send balloons? Did you see the balloons?
I don't know how I did that.
Yeah, you sent some balloons up.
Mm-hmm.
So for anybody watching on YouTube, you can backtrack and watch Matt somehow do some kind of hand gesture that sends some balloons up. I think that happened to Monica McNutt on ESPN the other day too. So you're in good company at least.
Fantastic.
But so 2 attempted catch and shoot jumpers, virtually not looking at the rim. He's an exciting player when he's aggressive and he's attacking the rim. He's doing the things that I think he's capable of. But it's kind of like you said, like they're paying Mark Mitchell a lot of money. Mark Mitchell is coming in to kind of be a focal point. And that's probably Aiden's most natural position. So how is he going to find minutes? Well, he's either going to fight Trent Pierce off and backstop Mark. He's going to find a way to get on the floor at the 5. I don't really see him catching minutes at the 3, because there's just not enough skill set there to push out guys like Grill or Bates or Cruz.
Or keep Boateng sitting.
Yeah, and sitting Boateng and like, if you can get kind of like the same defensive effort and impact from like Marcus Allen, which I mean is not out of the realm of possibility. And somebody who maybe isn't a great offensive player right now, and but I think with some work could be at least not a net negative.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Marcus is also used to doing this. He and Trent. I think the thing that people need to understand here too is Trent and Marcus did this already at Compass Prep a couple of years ago. There was a North Carolina commit whose name is escaping right now, who was their 4 guy. And Trent and Marcus took turns backstopping at the 4. Yeah. Marcus came on to shoot. Trent came on to shoot and knock down shots. Marcus started because he was a great defender. He rebounded. He made winning plays on 50-50 balls. He was a timely cutter. He moved the ball to a shooter on reversals. Those guys are used to being in this situation where they're going to come in behind an established vet and they're going to be able to figure out how to buy into roles. They can both slide up and down. They're maybe not as bouncy. I think Aiden's probably out of the 3 guys here the most freakishly athletic. But Marcus Allen is no slouch. Trent Pierce knows how to use his size and positioning really, really well. So the question for me at the 4 is, what's Aiden going to do to distinguish himself from the other 2 freshmen who collectively can do the same things that he can do?
Yeah.
It's going to be, does it become a slasher off the bounce, or does it become a guy that can become a competent catch and shoot threat to at least keep spacing open? That's where I think the opportunity, we've talked about the freshmen here. When I did my projections a couple weeks ago, and if you look at the projections for, Watkins' post on the site, I think last week as well, Marcus is down around 12th or 13th right now in projected minutes. Just ahead of him is Aiden Shaw. And in 10th is Trent Pierce. There's an opportunity if Marcus, who I think showed good mechanics as a jump shooter, just lack of consistency. If he can give you something on offense, he's going to give you what Aiden can give you on defense. He's a little more athletic. He's really, really good in transition. There's a possibility that, if Trent doesn't, shoot the way he needs to, and if Aiden is the same, Marcus Allen could be a breakout guy if, the development for those 2 guys in front of him has stalled. Now, that's not ideal. We want to see guys get better, but I don't want to, we're assuming that everyone continues to make progress along their skill curves here. If that happens, I think Marcus is going to, get caught out. But I think there's a, path for him at the 4 to get into some more minutes than we expect. I think the question is going to come for Honor, for Honor Batang at the 3, what that looks like for him. But there's some questions about guys at the 4 that I think are ambiguous right now in terms of answers. And that offers opportunity for Marcus, if things break right for him.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And this is, I think, where we're really going to be kind of keeping track of what happens in this crunch, because it does seem like the roster is a little bit light on ball handling, but maybe that's a sign that they like, where Ant Robinson is, getting Perkins in, bringing Warwick in, guys that they sort of believe can sort of handle these spots 1 and 2 and not really have any kind of negative impact. And then looking at the 3 and the 4 spot, very clearly you have Mark Mitchell, you bring in Cruz. And so like, what's going to happen with these young guys? The only way that they're going to see minutes is if they're, fighting like crazy on defense and being sort of, I don't know, at worst average on offense, right?
Right. And I think when I looked at the projections for guys like Boateng and I looked at Watkins' projection, people may say 30% of minutes or 35% of minutes. That seems awfully low for that's pretty much an average and right in line with what we're seeing for guys like Honor in sort of the post-portal era.
We should also clarify on a good team.
on a good team.
And we certainly hope that Mizzou is a good team.
Yeah. This is the thing. If your freshmen are playing a lot of minutes and they aren't one-and-done guys, like certifiable one-and-done guys, your team is probably not very good.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. Or that guy breaking out has, like, suddenly come from out of left field to become an NBA prospect. It happens to, like, one prospect a year in, like, the 25 to 75 range. It happens to one out of, like, 20 guys.
Yeah.
Like, there's a surprise.
Like Bubba Carrington kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, there was a guy for Ohio State that had happened to, I think, Sinsball. You know, like, it happens to guys. A couple of years ago, it was Moses Moody a couple of years ago. There are guys that just play their way and, you know, outplay their ranking. It happens. But most of the time, it's 30 to 40% of minutes, you know, 18 to 20% usage, hopefully solid 1 point per 100 possession efficiency. Honor Batang, you know, I think I've watched him play 40 times. At this point, I've watched him play every spot from the 2, the 3, and the 4. He's a natural wing. He is an absolute terror in a straight line in transition. If you give him an angle to catch, rip, and go off a skip or a reversal, he's a nightmare. The difference, I think, for Honor, and I think had people a little high on him going into last fall, was the handle was tightening up a little bit. The jumper was coming online. A little bit of regression over his last high school season. There were some factors for that. He was playing more at the 4 because Little Rock Central needed him to. But the handle and the dribble counters aren't really there. If it's not a straight line drive, if you beat him with the first slide to his spot, the counters are a little bit tough. Tendency sometimes to settle for some tough jumpers. The kinds of jumpers he hunts are easy to scout. A lot of turnarounds. The shooting mechanics, I think, look great. It's just, the release point kind of changes a little bit, moves up and down. You got to get that a little bit settled. Point is, he defends well. He's really great on the break. But in the half court offensively, there's some work to do. And, I think he could be a part of some lineups where you're playing small and you're trying to play fast. But if you're trying to go night in, night out with your base lineup, I think there's going to be some work to do for him in that respect. And that is not meant as a criticism. That is a very normal thing for this sort of encounter. You and I have talked about it before. Once you get outside of 25 to 55 or 60, you're starting to project kind of guys with more athletic tools. Mm-hmm. And it's either athletic tools and skill work, or skill work and maybe lacking some athleticism. Nor's kind of in the first group. So there's some skill work that's got to get done. He's a sharp kid. He's put in a ton of work and gotten better over the last couple of years. There have been settings, like the Adidas Euro Camp or the Adidas All-American Camp, where he looked good as a shooter. It's just finding the consistency there. And this is a packed lineup, so I'm not sure, how many minutes are going to be there for him to really find a groove. But who knows? Maybe he surprises us. But I think if he's getting 12 to 14 minutes a night, that's not a bad thing. If he's finding a way to sort of spackle that together, that's going to be typical. And we're going to look for him to do what he always does, which is be a really, really, really good defender and really, really good on the break. And if he's doing that, then we can feel okay.
Yeah.
No balloons.
So then the last thing, and this does sort of fit with our theme of wings, which is sort of the best fit for a small ball big, guys who can handle in a pinch. I think, a lot of people are going to default to Mitchell. I think Mitchell's going to play a lot of.
I keep him at the 3 or the 4.
The 3 or the 4 spot. It's possible you could see some minutes for him at the 5, but I would rather have somebody else defending bigs, because when you defend big guys, you tend to foul a little bit with more frequency. So you can use fouls with guys like Aiden Shaw. You can use fouls with guys like Trent Pierce.
Yep.
I would rather have those guys, making the effort, trying to get around in front, forcing lobs over the top. And even maybe like Jacob Cruz, just fight your butt off. Thoughts on that?
When they've played small ball, last year, Aiden was the 5, Trent was the 4. That's how it worked, and they would Now they would alternate sometimes who's at the point of the press. Like you might drop Trent back as the back line guy, and you might have Aiden just because he's a freak who can jump and create deflections. But when it got into the half court, it was Aiden at the 5. And I think it's going to stay that way because they want Mitchell to play that Kobe Brown boss role. And that's a spot where you have to almost in a way be a secondary kind of ball handler. And to your point, you don't want those guys drawing fouls. You don't want them, getting into foul trouble or, being delayed getting into stuff. So it's Aiden Shaw for me as the small ball 5. Plus, really good as a rotational, as a guy rotating over from the weak side. Can handle some switches if you attack him in that spot pretty well, which sometimes we're going to see in big little, ball screens. I just think it's a natural thing to slide him at the 5 spot. Trent can play the 5. I think you're going to have to roll help down because they tried it a couple times last year and shoulder got put into his chest and it was a free pass to the basket. You're going to need somebody digging down or somebody coming baseline side being ready to help a little bit. But yeah, I think in a small ball lineup, I almost think you play Mitchell at the 3 or the 4 rather than the 4 or the 5. Pretty easy for me.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We'll get to who's actually going to play the 5 in another pod, but it seems to me that like the most likely place where Aiden is going to catch minutes is probably at that spot.
Yeah.
How that develops, we'll see. We are like a week away from the NBA draft.
Yeah. Exactly a week.
Who is your most draftable Mizzou player?
Probably Mitchell. Just because I think, reliable defender, switchable defender. I think, there are going to probably be questions, if you put him into combine testing, that he'd probably be great out as an average athlete. We play basketball. We don't run cones for a living. Mm-hmm. I think I've watched him play defense in the ACC for 2 years against really good guys, and he's really good. If the jumper can come along, he's a guy that you can see, growing into a potential 3-and-D type of guy. I don't know if he'll have Kobe's natural sort of creative inclination. I think that's always what's held me up when they've said, or when people talk about him coming in and being a Kobe Brown type role. Kobe had a little bit more of a natural handle when he got here. He was a little bit, better at reading things. He kind of put that to the side for his first couple of years with Zoe. But that was something, if you watch Kobe in high school, he had, really, really effectively.
He had that ability in grassroots. He had the ability, in high school ball.
Yeah.
He was a playmaker, even if he was an inefficient one. In his later years in high school.
Yeah.
The ability to like make the reads was there, and you could see that.
Yeah. Some will tell you Marcus flashed that. I don't know if he's flashed as much as or as consistently as Kobe did coming up through the prep ranks. But, he does a lot of what I think you want to do. He's switchable. He's smart. He communicates on defense. He bought into a role last year. They moved him from the wing to the 4. They gave the creative duties to Filipowski. They moved him to the 4 so they could get another ball handler onto the floor. And he embraced that and went from a guy who was getting some slashing opportunities and catch and shoots to being a cutter, roller, and a dump-off threat, and was really good at all of it. So I think he's already kind of got the mentality that, if he comes in, he's going to do what he's got to do to earn minutes. If the jumper can get to the point where, we saw it with Kobe, where there's a jump in there, I think he becomes attracted to a lot of teams. Maybe late first round, maybe into that mid-second round kind of range where you take a 2-way or a couple guaranteed year deal on him, you put him in the G League and see what happens. If Honor Batang, way outplays his ranking, he's a guy that I think could get looks, but that's going to require, like, guys who are in that range are either they have monster usage and they, become 15, 16 point a game scorers, or they shoot the crap out of the basketball. They shoot it so well that NBA teams have to take notice. So Honor Batang would be a guy that I would have in there. And I'll throw this out. I think Ant Robinson's a guy that I just think 6'3", 6'4" guys with plus 5'6" wingspans, who are able to apply on-ball pressure the way he can, are really, really rare. The offensive piece has to come along, but there's a lot of tools there that I think could become really, really interesting for him. So those are kind of the three I look at. I think who among the veterans do you think is going to pop out and, really, really impress? And I say that in all seriousness, you've got to, if you're 23, 24 years old, a front office is going to look at you and say, okay, there is nothing left really on the skill curve at this level. There's not a lot left in terms of athletic maturation. You've got to be elite at something. I think Mitchell still has some room on the growth curve, in terms of his game. We talked about Honor, and then we've got Ant. You're going to have to look at which guys are young and projectable and are also going to get enough production to intrigue people. So to me, it's Mitchell, Boateng, and Robinson are the guys that I sort of put markers on right now.
I think you could, and outside of that, like if you squint, I think you could make a decent case for Tamar Bates just because of his ability to catch and shoot.
Yeah.
He's shown he can shoot the ball with consistency. I think like that's such a premium in the NBA. I think for him to be able to kind of take that step, he's going to have to be a much better defender.
Yep.
And if he becomes a much better defender, then and you're 6'4" with long rangey arms, and you can knock down shots, you can defend. You could catch on. But even like that's two-way deal kind of stuff I think at best.
There are guys here that I think are going to land with decent leagues abroad. Like I think there are some guys who are going to be pros here. It's just are they going to maybe they have to go to Europe for a couple of years and really round out their games, and maybe they become enticing to come back. But those are the four guys I think we've sort of talked about that I think are probably, in my mind, have the most pro potential right now.
Not Josh Gray or.
I just think Peyton
Marshall.
Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns are intriguing to me, not for next year, but I think as sophomores, if one guy gets comfortable making reads and the other one puts on weight, there's both those guys are interesting, guys 2-3 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't want to diminish that. I think they both have some intriguing tools, but it's just going to take some time for them to sort of begin to put together kind of a competent CV to entice some scouts.
How excited are you to watch the 7'9" Oliver Olivier Rioux, who is joining the Florida Gators this year?
Can't block shots if he's 20 feet from the rim. Put that guy in ball screens. Put him in. I know what I'm doing. Big little ball screens the entire time.
Yeah.
What's your guy going to do out there? He's got to get back. He's got to recover back.
Can you like 7'9"?
I think they got to be adding 3 inches to that. They have to be inflating that.
He was listed at like 7'7" last year at IMG, and they said he was still growing. So it's like, he can barely move. So
that's the thing. You have him come out. And
I don't even think he's on scholarship at Florida. Like I think they got him some NIL dollars just to see if they could develop, and we'll see if any of that happens.
I'll just say slide Ruben Shinyelu minutes over Olivier. That's all I'm going to say. I buy more on Ruben than I do on Olivier.
So we are going to get out of here. Running up against 50 minutes in a podcast where we had nothing to talk about. Not bad. Good job, Matt.
So I do my yammer.
Most of the references that Mr. Harris made tonight were references to some of the great data and posting that both he and Matt Watkins are doing on the RockM Plus forums. So you can subscribe at RockM Plus at rockm.plus if you're not subscribed, please do. If you are already subscribed, go check out their handiwork. Max Baker's joined the team. He's going to have some interesting football recruiting stuff coming down the pike shortly. That I'm pretty excited about. And then I also want to basically say that we have a really, really cool preseason magazine coming here soon. Big football season. The guys have been working on this for months. It is almost ready to go. It is really, really cool. Going to look great. Lots of interesting information. If you're a Mizzou fan, there's no reason not to have it. So be on the lookout for the official announcement and release of that. Anything else you got? Subscribe to this podcast if you're not already. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That helps us out too. And we're going to take a couple weeks off.
When we get back, maybe I'll have watched all the 16U games I still need to get through. That's all we're doing right now.
Yeah, and we can ask Matt Harris all about the 2026 contacts. So until then, thanks everybody for tuning in. Happy June 19th.
Juneteenth. There you go.
Everybody celebrates. Happy Juneteenth, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.